Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, host of the Vision for Life podcast. The basis for everything we discuss on this podcast is God's revelation of himself to us. God's revelation surrounds us. His revelation of himself brings wisdom and clarity to those who lack the ability to see. Paul writes of this to the followers of Jesus living in Ephesus when he says, "I do not cease to give thanks for you, remembering you in my prayers, that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and of revelation of him, having the eyes of your hearts enlightened, that you may know what is the hope to which he has called you." I'm joined today by Adam and Erin Anglin. Adam, hello. Erin, hi.
Hey.
Hi, how's it going?
Thank you guys for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Adam is the worship and arts pastor here at Fellowship Denver, so one of my coworkers, and pastor here at our church. And Erin, his wife, is an architect and co-owner of the architecture firm Cult Creative. And we are going to take on the topic of marriage today. Erin's excited. Adam, zero.
I'm ready.
Adam is zero response.
I'm locked in. I'm ready. Let's do this.
For several weeks here on the podcast, we've been working our way through a series of conversations that we've given the heading, The Beyond Me Story. And the reason we selected that term was actually throwing back to a sermon series that we went through in 2015 that was called The Beyond Me Story. Meaning, our inclination as modern Western Americans is to see everything through the lens of individualism. In order to make sense out of our lives, we place ourselves into a kind of story. And because of the way we're conditioned to think individualistically, we center ourselves in this story. So Hunter had originally come up with these terms, the me story, which indicates our individualistic lenses that we've inherited from living in this time and place. And the Beyond Me story indicates that there actually is a bigger story. The me lenses, the me story, does help us see some things very clearly as modern Americans, but it limits our ability to see other things. And so our desire in these conversations is to acknowledge that there is a bigger story, one that we are a part of. And we're calling that bigger story the Beyond Me story. And this story encourages us to live all of life within the bigger story of the gospel. But now we're taking on just relationships. And so last week, Hunter and I discussed singleness. This week, Adam and Erin and I are going to discuss marriage. And then we also will discuss a broader sort of community or friendship idea that fits into these categories, how we're conditioned to think about these things and how the gospel helps us to see them differently. So because this individualistic narrative is so strong, we all fall into asking questions that sound sort of like, does this place or person or church or job, does it fit me? Does it help me become the best version of myself? Is it helping me find fulfillment? Does it allow me to express my true self? And we tend to apply those same questions to relationships.
Yeah.
All right. But before I just begin, asking you guys all the personal questions about your marriage, would you fill us in a bit on where you're from, how long you've been in Denver, how long you've been at Fellowship, and Adam, how long you've been on staff and came to be a pastor at Fellowship?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll go first.
Yeah, you go first.
Great. So I've been in Denver since 2008 and on staff at Fellowship since 2009. And I started helping out on Sundays and then kind of part-time, full-time over a couple of years. But had no working for a church experience, but played music, loved Jesus, loved people. and it was like kind of a slow work. of God, I think, on my heart and just kind of pulling me to the church. From Arkansas, grew up there. People find out that I'm from Arkansas and they know Hunter is because it comes up in sermons and stuff, but I didn't know Hunter at all. There's actually, you can know different people, not know the same people, be from the same small state. But
So wait,
yeah.
You're saying you met Hunter after you moved to Denver?
That's right.
Even though you both are from Arkansas.
Yeah, that's right. I know. It's kind of
wild.
wild. Yeah.
It's wild.
It's crazy. No, but yeah, grew up there, born and raised there, and all my family's there. So yeah, did I answer all the questions? I don't know that I did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
Yeah, that's kind of me. Yeah.
I am from kind of all over the South, but mostly Memphis for middle school and high school. And I should say the suburbs of Memphis. I'm not from the city. People from there would be offended. I went to college in Arkansas, and that's where Adam and I met. And then I moved out here in 2007 to go to grad school. I went to CU Denver and got my master's in architecture there. And Adam and I were dating long distance. And then we got married in 2008. And so Adam moved out here right before we got married. But when I moved here in 2007, I think I lived here like a month or two before I found fellowship and started coming. And so then when Adam and I got married, I had already been at fellowship and a member at fellowship for about a year. And so then he started coming with me. And then they needed help. And Dave took Adam to lunch one day. I was like, we really need help. And you're the only person I know who can play guitar. Can you please help us?
I don't know if he worded it as you're the only person I know, but
Let's be honest. Dave doesn't know a lot of musicians.
no, I like that version of the story. That's basically what it was.
It's pretty accurate.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Stated or not.
Yes.
I might have been the only person he knew.
I think that's factually correct.
Yeah. People who may have only recently begun attending fellowship, particularly since we've moved into our location here at 1990 South Broadway, sort of have to use their imagination to imagine fellowship in its early stages.
Oh, yeah.
But it definitely had the sense of being a church plant. So I mean, fellowship was started in the fall of 2006. Erin, you said you started attending in 2007.
2007. Yeah, I moved here in August. And I think my first Sunday at fellowship was probably in September of 2007. I remember it was the very first Sunday that we met at the Colorado History Museum. So the first week that they moved from the Space Gallery over to the History Museum, and which was just a few blocks from my tiny little 500 square foot apartment in Cap Hill. So it was easy location for me. But I went to a few churches before I found fellowship, and they were all awful. I mean, just awful. It was terrible. And then I showed up at fellowship, and it was just so refreshing for it to be a place where they really valued speaking kind of directly, teaching directly from the word, and holding on to that very firmly. And that was such a huge thing for me because the other churches in Denver were pretty loose. And so it was great to find a place that was firmly rooted in the gospel, and people were really nice and welcoming. And I think that those aspects of fellowship are still true today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is definitely true. We also, my husband and I, started attending in 2007, in the summer of 2007, before the church had hit a year old. But looking back, I don't think your account of Dave maybe taking Adam to lunch and saying, you're the only person I know who plays guitar, and you seem to love Jesus, and you're attending our church. Would you please lead music? That doesn't seem too far off.
No, it's believable. Well, and Dave actually did our pre-marriage counseling, so he had an opportunity to get to know Adam, a little bit more one-on-one as we did that, which was great. So he knew the heart of Adam. He knew who Adam was as a person, and but I still stand by. I think you're the only person he knows that knows how to play guitar. So
Not now, not anymore.
not anymore. That's true.
That's right.
That's true.
Yeah, and there were people leading music, but
Yes.
they
needed a break.
They needed a break. Yep, and so Dave was searching for someone who could step in, and Adam has been leading music at fellowship since then. But you also recently well, I say recently, but within the last couple of years, have joined the elder team, Adam, and so are now also directly involved in pastoring people and in leadership of the church as a part of the elder board as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I'm all the way in. It's just funny.
All the way committed, no way out.
I'm here now. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of fascinating to see how God has us on this kind of career path and this kind of call, to see this kind of call, I guess, on our own lives. And I don't know, it's really neat. And just to see like God's been faithful, and the amount of patience and grace my coworkers have just shown me over the years. It's been really, really sweet. So we feel super grateful to be in this spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm grateful for both of you, for your friendship, for your presence here at Fellowship. And because now I've known you for many years, I've gotten to see you actually through different stages of life, actually. Erin and I worked together.
I was wondering if you were going to bring
randomly.
it up. I was wondering.
Really randomly. For a short period of time, Erin and I worked together.
Yeah,
in a
you were my
context.
boss. That's the correct.
Yeah.
The correct way to frame that.
I mean, I hired Erin into an in-between job.
Yes.
But so I've had the chance to work with you in different contexts and have seen demonstrated your love for God and your love for others, and then watched you become parents and have worked with Adam now for years. And so I am so grateful for the presence that you have here at Fellowship, for your leadership and your love. And I'm grateful to be able to talk with you today, to share your own, I guess, story to this point of marriage and how God is using it in your lives, and then using it actually beyond just your lives, but to strengthen our community and as a displaying a picture of his love to our church in the way that the Bible talks about marriage. But we're going to back up a few steps and acknowledge sort of what we were talking about first, that actually we are given a set of assumptions by our culture about marriage, namely that the person that we marry is supposed to either complete us or bring a sort of meaning and purpose and value into our lives that makes us a better person, or that fulfills us in a certain way. So both of you have had both that formation in your lives, just growing up in America in recent years, and then you also have had the influence of family and of the various churches that you were a part of, so the Christian cultural component. So what was the understanding of marriage that was modeled for you or taught to you? What did you pick up on culturally or from your specific family or church communities?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think, culturally speaking, I feel like what's kind of portrayed is there's a couple of different ways that I think it sort of impressed on me culturally. One being there's like this mythical idea of the one, like the one person, which there's like so much pressure. If that's the real picture of things, there's so much pressure to find the one person in the world that's supposed to be your one. I mean, that's just kind of a crazy idea. But I think that's a cultural thing that gets imprinted, maybe most particularly on girls, I think. And then I think too, there is definitely this idea that you've already been speaking to of it's only valuable to be with someone as long as it is valuable to you, and in whatever way that you measure that. So if that's like this person makes me happy or this person gives me what I want, whatever that looks like, I think that's the way that it most commonly gets imprinted, and those things can be hard to shake as a person growing up. I think thankfully within my own family, I think my mom still kind of ascribes a little bit to the idea of the one. She definitely thinks my dad is the one. I don't view things that way. I think that I thankfully was part of churches that did a really good job of kind of talking through what marriage is and should be and how it should function within the church and within a person of faith. And so I was able to kind of process that stuff and to shake clear of those kinds of frameworks and to view it more like Adam was not created for me. Adam was created for God. And God is able to use Adam in my life as a means of sharpening me, as a means of drawing me closer to Him, to God, and God is able to kind of speak into my life through Adam in a lot of ways. But Adam is not. He's not my unicorn. He's not my one person that completes me and does X, Y, and Z. And so, yeah, I think those are some of the frameworks that I had growing up. I think my parents did a great job of just kind of talking to us about how marriage really is work. It is hard work to make a relationship last and to be something that you are truly committed to. So I think I did have some healthy mirrors of what a relationship looks like. And my parents have been married for 47 years and have such a great relationship. They're very close. So I was fortunate to have some of those things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of my own story with marriage growing up is really not. It was interesting to hear you talk about cultural pressure because I feel like so much of what I got was just from what I was experiencing at home. My mom and dad were divorced like around the time that I was born. And then my mom and stepdad got married. I was like 2 maybe-ish, somewhere around there. But they've been together like my whole life, essentially. It's all I've known. And so I got to see and experience some of the kind of the really hard brokenness of marriage. Just being that we would visit with my dad. He was still, kind of a present reality, and then just kind of see the wear and tear on your mom. You can kind of just see that and experience it, and it's really hard, and it's at times can be stressful and create some dysfunction. And then the flip side is I got to experience my stepdad and my mom as this like great picture of marriage, and it's obviously coming in and being a stepdad is like not a sweet spot to be in as a parent. And so that's got its own challenges. And yet over the years, I can look back and see, and even see today, a healthy marriage, a loving marriage, a real picture, a little bit more of a picture of like what I think we kind of have in our minds when we think of kind of your typical kind of American marriage, especially one where we're pursuing the Lord. And I think it's really, so I kind of have this, that was kind of my whole picture. And then it wasn't really until kind of high school, college years where I had more like Christian influence in my life. And really it was all about just like saving kind of yourself. That was like the big thing. I'm from the South, so it was all really big. There was a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye that was like incredibly influential on so many people. And it was all about just, hey, don't really date and not until you're ready to get married. And it's a very serious kind of weighty thing. So I don't know, that shaped a lot of my experience as well in the church. I think it was coming from a good place, but was not the best. I don't know. It's not the best way to kind of shape young minds, maybe.
Yeah, it loaded.
Sort of purity culture kind of stuff, but yeah.
Loaded a lot of significance into that one aspect of a marriage relationship, which is the sexual aspect of a marriage relationship, and said that you just need to avoid this, and didn't give you maybe, and while that was not wrong and still carried some value in that message in aligning one part of the picture that we see within Scripture, it's not really a well-rounded understanding of marriage, probably.
Well, and I think culturally, I kind of grew up in a place that was pretty balanced just in terms of how they taught kind of, here's a picture of what love is and what it means. And I don't know, but still there were like these little pockets where you'd hear about people or hear about friends or hear about folks in your community. And it's like, oh, they're really serious about this marriage thing. Oh, they're really serious about dating. And it's hard not to just kind of have that shape and affect kind of how you exist.
So as you got into your high school and college years, probably the age when most people begin dating, with the understanding that you'd been given of the meaning of marriage, how you go about what your perspective is on a person that you would or would not marry, how did you assess how to go about dating or who was worth dating in a sense? How did you set those parameters for yourself?
Yeah. I think, early on, it was pretty immature just in terms of, I think for me, it was like, well, does this person go to church? And that was like sort of the depth of that. But I'm from the South, so everyone goes to church. So, and as I grew in my own faith and kind of, what I was learning from the Bible was also really informing decisions in my life, that took on a more serious, measure. So, I started dating in high school, had a boyfriend in high school for a long time. And I chose to date him because he was a person that was serious about his faith and not just like, I go to church, but there were real distinctions between like, no, I take this seriously and I really believe this. So for me, that was the distinction, was like really finding people who were serious about their faith and could engage, on an intellectual level about faith and talk about things in a really, in a way that demonstrated this is real for me and has impacted my life and is not just kind of a surface level thing. So for me, that was how I made decisions about who I would date.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't date anyone until I dated Erin, which is like such a cheesy, silly reality. It makes me sound, I don't know what it makes me sound like. It makes me sound so funny, I guess.
Just makes you sound like you took that book to heart.
You really took that book seriously.
I did not even read that book. I don't know what it was. It was, I had a really close-knit group of guy friends that I'm still close with today. Some guys that I would consider still some of my best friends. These were conversations we were always kind of having and talking about. And I think there was like a level of real kind of care and intention, like even like in that group of guys, the dating was like something that they took seriously. Mm-hmm. It was like, hey, I'm not just hanging out with this girl or hanging out with that girl. It was really like we were old enough and mature enough at kind of the middle tail end of high school, like enough, not that we were mature, but we were mature enough to kind of get that, like, this is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know. I think some of that was shaping for me just to have that close kind of group of friends. And, and so it wasn't really a thing. I think I wanted to date. I think that's like the most sort of normal, natural thing, especially I was a teenage child. I was a teenage mm-hmm. boy. Mm-hmm. But it was really trying to let this vision for marriage, the weight of it kind of sit in a place in my life where it had priority. And so, I just genuinely didn't date. I was a little bit more on the like, not going to date till I'm ready for marriage, I guess. But I don't think it was anything that I'm like, man, years from now, that's what I'm going to tell people or whatever. Yeah. It just happened to be that I think that's how God was working in my life in that season.
And you had influences
and
that
I had
supported
influences and just support and guys who also cared deeply about this sort of thing. And I think too, just coming from, my parents were divorced, there was a little bit of like, okay, it's weighty. It's kind of it's a pretty heavy thing. I don't feel super comfortable just like jumping into relationships. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't that I was so much like afraid or that I was sort of running from relationships as much as it was just like, hey, when I do this, I want to be thoughtful. Mm-hmm.
So as the two of you started dating and were moving towards marriage, what sorts of questions did you begin to ask to yourself about the other person. So, Adam, what questions did you ask of yourself about Erin, and Erin, vice versa, that started to help you determine, is this a person who I could marry?
Yeah, I think Adam and I, when we started dating, at least from my perspective, we became friends very quickly. We had been friends actually for a little while, for about a year before we started dating, before we went on our first date. But we weren't super close. Adam, I think, kept like a pretty healthy distance from girlfriends, not in that like, friends that are girls, not in the sense that he didn't want to talk to girls or be friends with girls, but I think he kept like a really healthy kind of space between himself and anyone that he was interested in dating versus like a friend. So when we started dating, we just connected really quickly, and we became very good friends very, very rapidly. We connected on a lot of different levels. We connected on a faith level, but then both of us also being kind of having an artistic, creative background. That was a real bond for us. And so there just was never a point where I really questioned it. It just was like, it just felt so natural as friends. We connected and we were able to converse about a lot of heavy things and a lot of fun and lighthearted things. And it was just super enjoyable to spend time together. And the more I got to know Adam, the more I thought, I really love what I see God doing in him. And there was a point, I remember having the thought one day that I wanted to know who Adam was when he was 65 years old. I wanted to know who he was and what he had done with his life and how God had used him. And that was the moment where it really clicked for me, where I was like, well, I guess I should probably marry him then, because I genuinely like this person and I care for him very deeply, and I want to see what God does with him and in him. So that was the moment for me where I was like, yeah, I'm going to marry Adam. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Your question is really great. It's probably more thoughtful than I've ever been, just about like at that age. You know, like I think there was a big piece of this was our friendship, because there were sort of questions that you sort out in the midst of being friends with somebody. That you don't have to sort out if you, you don't have to, I don't know what I'm trying to say. But if you're just kind of jumping into dating, there's a lot more potentially to work through. Whereas if you're friends first, you kind of learn these things over time. So your appreciation for that person can kind of grow as you're getting to know them. There was always kind of an easiness to Erin and a commitment to the Lord and to her faith that never, it was interesting. It never quite felt like, it's one thing to like know that you're going to be in a spot of like leading your spouse or whatever. But she just always felt so firm in the Lord, and it gave me confidence to know that was going to be a central aspect of our being together. So I don't know, those are the kinds of questions that I maybe thought through or had going on, but you're sort of processing so much of life just in real time. So much of it was just like, I genuinely enjoy this person. I think if, knowing that we had our faith in common, I think did create a ton of stability, but yeah.
So it sounds as if you had pretty secure footing in that from the beginning of your relationship. But how would you say that your understanding of marriage has changed or shifted since that time?
I think there are certain things you just aren't going to know. But I probably have a deeper appreciation. Like there's probably more depth to kind of some of the inklings that I had. I was just kind of like, I think this is how marriage looks. I think this is how it functions. But I think, yeah. So there's probably just more depth there. I think too, it's hard to appreciate the kind of totality of years and just the difference between kind of what you think marriage is, actually being married in those first few years, and then what marriage kind of then becomes 10 years later, or 20 or 30. I don't even know that piece of it yet. But I think so there's just certain aspects of marriage that it would be impossible for you to even know about, let alone appreciate or understand. So I think I'm genuinely surprised. It may sound weird to say, but at how central our faith in Christ is actually this thing that we can come back to. And it is this grounding kind of gravitational pull on our lives individually, but then our lives together. And to see that the depth that gives our marriage is something that you're like, yeah, I know that's going to be there. But then you experience it, and that's really different. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, you walk into marriage, and even, I mean, I would say Adam and I were both really serious, thoughtful people who had asked ourselves questions about what we wanted marriage to look like separately from each other. Just, in young adulthood, had asked ourselves questions like, what do I want my marriage to look like? What do I want? How do I want to function kind of within that? I think we both had been very thoughtful about that and had, sat under good teachers who talked about that. And so you walk into marriage, even with that kind of preparation, quote unquote preparation, you walk into marriage thinking what it's going to look like, or you have ideas about, let's say communication or how we're going to handle arguments, or, we read books during pre-marriage counseling, and you walk in with these ideas of how that's going to work and what it's going to look like. But when it comes down to it, the reality of it getting fleshed out is always a little different than what you had envisioned or pictured for yourself. And it's always a little, even though you may think, yes, I know marriage is going to be hard, and I'm going to walk in and I'm ready to do the work. Even still, when it gets down to it and the rubber meets the road, it really is different, and it really is surprising. Like, okay, I knew this was going to be hard. This is hard. Sometimes it is really hard, and so I think those are the things that have been surprising, or that I've learned kind of through the course of just actually being married to Adam.
The Bible provides for us a really distinct picture of marriage. There's the idea of oneness or unity that is a theme beginning in Genesis. Two different people, but God says that somehow in this relationship, they do experience a kind of unity that points to something greater, that points to a way in which God actually is unified with his people through the gospel. We find that out later through the unfolding revelation of the Bible in the New Testament. And we see it presented in the New Testament, then we see marriage presented in the New Testament as a picture of Christ's love. But this aspect of unity that was introduced in Genesis is maintained throughout. It just gets developed more through the unfolding story of the Bible. And then we see it most clearly in the way that Christ sacrifices himself. Let's go ahead and read a passage from Ephesians together, and then we'll come back to our discussion from your own experience and first-person perspective. But we're going to read this passage in Ephesians and then talk a little bit about how this picture gets complicated by the cultural narratives about marriage that are so prevalent. So Ephesians 5, we're going to pick up in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. Let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So the distinct picture given to us in Ephesians is one of sacrificial love, and that is exactly opposite to the central narratives that we referred to earlier that are so prevalent just in our culture. The ones that ask, does this person fulfill me? Does this person allow me to become or express my truest self? Does this person add a particular sort of value or meaning to my life? So before we move on and discuss more from your own story of marriage, we're going to listen to a portion of a sermon that Dave preached within this Beyond Me series back in 2015 about this passage, in which he's commenting on the passage from Ephesians that we just read together.
You see, the marriage itself and the oneness experience of marriage actually refers to something beyond itself. It refers to the ultimate sacrificial love discovered in Jesus Christ. And yet there is something pretty unique about the love of Jesus that even the best marriage can never replicate, that only Jesus can give. Because it turns out that the love of Jesus can fulfill you. It turns out that the love of Jesus actually does work to make us whole. It turns out that his love can actually forgive us when we are broken and needy and not whole. His love can make us whole. His love can cleanse us. The gospel goes even further and says that his love not only cleanses us and fulfills us, but now through the work of Jesus, we can experience oneness through Jesus with God. We can be one with God in a way that oneness in marriage is merely a foreshadowing of.
So if the picture given to us then in this passage, as Dave was mentioning, gives us an image of a certain sort of unity, and that there is this inherent theme of sacrifice, because if Christ is the picture, then what he did for his church was he gave himself, his life for her, for the church. And that is what marriage is symbolizing. That's what marriage is a picture of. So then how have you seen that understanding actually play out in your own marriage? What ways has your marriage required a sort of sacrifice, or as an understanding of that picture has gotten integrated into your life together, and your understanding of marriage through experiencing it has developed? How do you see that image played out in your own marriage?
I mean, I think what is really fascinating about the Ephesians 5 section is that ultimately, even though definitively there are some differences to what Paul is saying husbands and wives are called to, at the essence of it, it's really love for both parties. The point for both husband and wife is to love one another unconditionally, and that inherent within that is a certain level of service and sacrifice. So I think for us, or at least for me, in being married to Adam, I feel like there are times when I have to choose something that I know is going to be ultimately for his good or better for him, something that is in service of him and not necessarily what I would choose for myself. And oftentimes this happens in really small ways, like even just conversationally. So like just after being married for 13 years, I've learned that there are certain things that Adam needs within conversation. And when sometimes I might be distracted or want to do something else instead of giving him what I know he needs. But it's the times when I can really stop and engage with him on an emotional level, on a deeper level, that I know this is what he needs right now, and that's a choice I have to make sometimes. It's an active choice that I have to make sometimes to give him, what he needs in that moment, what I know is going to be best for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think for me, the kind of the lens through which we see everything as a family unit, or as like there's an aspect of like everything that we're doing. I really want to consider like Erin's, not just like, will she like this, or can she get along with it, or whatever, but it really is this like thing of like, but is it good for her?
Mm-hmm.
Is it genuinely good for her? Or is it just something that I want to do? And it could be small things, everyday things, but also kind of bigger life things, career decisions, or, buying a house or something like that. So I think, that's kind of where this probably gets lived out for us and looks real for us. To the point now where I think all of our lives, there's no decision that really gets made without kind of considering every part of it or every person involved. And how is this leading us to the Lord? Is this deepening our love for God? Or is this just something we simply want to do? And then finding that rhythm to make life fun and enjoyable and to make life together really sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are this is just kind of digging a little bit deeper into that same question, but what are some ways that have been really revealed to you in the course of your marriage that you were different or have different perspectives on some things? Because one of the really interesting aspects of this theme of unity throughout the Bible is that there were two different people, a man and a woman, and they experienced a radical sort of unity that points to the way in which Jesus then is unified with his people. But it is not in a way that eliminates difference. It actually recognizes the differences and says that the unity is not at the expense of those, but with those in full play. So in consideration of those differences, there's still an experience of unity, almost because of them, that the differences actually make that unity more beautiful. So what are some ways that you've found that you are different or had to work through this within the context of your marriage?
Go for it. You go.
So I think Adam, we are different in a lot of ways. We're pretty compatible in a lot of ways too. But I would say I tend to be a broad person, so I tend to kind of want to engage with a lot of things, but not very deeply. I tend to say yes to too many things. Adam is more of a go deep on one thing and he'll go real deep on it. I mean, he's still perfecting his pizza dough recipe. He tends to get really hyper.
It's true.
He gets hyper focused on things, which is really great. I'm also like a very slow decision maker. I think about things for a long time and I want to evaluate it from every side of things. And Adam is a get things done. So when we bought our first house, we were talking about what colors we wanted to paint our house. And I'm a designer. So I went and got paint swatches and I was like, I'm thinking about these. And then I came home from work and Adam had painted the whole house. And I was like, I was still thinking about those. I didn't say that that's where I wanted those to go, but he did it. That's a pretty significant difference between the two of us. What else?
Yeah, I don't know. You're a little bit more, I think I realized, like outgoing. But I think you're up for an adventure more so than I am. But I think I didn't realize that maybe about myself. Everyone wants to be like, think of themselves as like highly adventurous and spontaneous. I think I've gotten better at that, but you really are kind of more so, I think, that way. And I tend to kind of like, I could sit and play my guitar all day and and I that is energizing and restores me, and yeah. But the thing that restores you, I feel like, is going out and doing something and
Yeah,
kind
absolutely.
of. So I think, I don't know. Those are fun, anecdotal, but yeah,
Yeah.
small ways.
But if your approach to a relationship is, does this person enable me to be the best me, then sometimes I think those things in the context of a marriage, when you jump into a marriage, can feel like liabilities instead of a way to celebrate the differences that are present within the two people involved in the marriage, that they can actually feel instead like a barrier to you becoming or expressing your fullest self. So how is it then within the context of your marriage that what you described before, this aspect of service and seeing one another, how have those things played out?
Yeah. I think one thing I've had to learn about Adam over being married for 13 years is that he feels things very deeply. He's a very emotional person. And so one area that used to be create quite a bit of tension for us is if we had to have, if we were having a difficult conversation, or if he was experiencing something that felt very personal and painful for him.
Everything.
all things at all times.
Things, yeah.
And he kind of just exists on that plane of emotion.
Yeah.
That's wild. And I don't. I tend to be a little bit more objective. I also am a person that kind of tries to look at situations from a variety of perspectives. And so, early on, when Adam would bring a problem to me, like maybe it was a situation at work or a situation, with a friend or something else. And I would try to thinking I was being helpful, I would try to say, well, think about how the other person feels, and let's think about it from that point of view. But the result being that Adam felt highly offended because he didn't feel seen or heard. And so I've had to learn how to sort of rein that part of my brain in a little bit, and not necessarily, not that I can't help Adam view things from another point of view, because I do think that is actually something I offer him, but that can't be my first inclination. My first inclination, it needs to be to allow Adam to feel heard and understood, and before I can engage him on, okay, let's maybe think outside of that, so that's an area where, I've had to adjust. I would say another way that Adam and I are different, and that has kind of been a way that we have, I guess, grown together actually over the course of marriage, is I tend to, again, kind of manage a lot of things in my own head, within our family, within our household. So kind of within my own head, sort of keeping track of all of the things that need to happen. So, signing the kids up for sports, or, I manage our finances, and I pay the bills, and I do a lot of those kinds of things just because I have them in my head, and I tend to be internal with those things and carry most of the burden of that internally. Which is not healthy or helpful to anyone. But what Adam is really good at is he's actually really good at identifying when I'm overloaded and when I'm stressed, and where he's not necessarily going to be the person to think of those things to do them. So in other words, to take the mental load off, but maybe that's not really the help that I need. The help is that I need someone to step in and to just kind of, for me to hand things off to. And that's not, I'm not naturally inclined to be a person to hand off tasks. But Adam actually is really good at stepping in and saying, you seem really overwhelmed. Give me something to do. Tell me what I need to do. We need to call the bank. I'll call the bank. I can do that this week. We need to get the oil changed. I can do that. Yeah. Just tell me what I need to do. Where I'm not great at just first and foremost identifying how I can ask for help. Adam's really good at stepping in and saying, please let me help you.
Yeah, I think with that there's a element of sensitivity to, like, because this goes both directions, but how are the things that are happening in our life kind of affecting us and changing us or shaping us? And at times, it's just kind of that awareness of like, you're owning too many things in this moment, and they all feel urgent right now. So then how do we kind of give of our schedule and our time and maybe our preferences to help your spouse feel more comfortable, or to kind of be able to unload some of these things and to create some clarity for them, both mentally, but just practically too. There's so many things in life we have to do. And so, I do think for me, like, to have the permission from Erin to like unplug in the midst of a crazy full life with kids and everything that's going on, to do the things that are going to like restore or recharge me, is super, like, I feel served in that way. It's incredibly sacrificial, but I know it takes real work, because when things are bearing down on you and things are really pressing you, then it's tough to be like, yeah, no, it's fine. Go do the thing that you want to.
Sure, go record for 2 hours.
Yeah,
that's fine.
go work on, whatever. So yeah, but
I hear you both though saying in the context of the things you're describing, I hear both of you saying that you work to be attuned to the needs of the other person. And I think that is what we see in that picture of Christ in the church. There's a reciprocity and a real desire for the flourishing of the other. So a few sort of bigger points that we want to make within the context of this conversation, and asking how the love of Jesus, in the really radical way he displays it on behalf of his church, how that impacts us in this discussion today. And one thing that I think we should mention, just clearly call out, is within what Dave brought up about this passage, is we don't need the love of our spouse to fulfill us. Our spouse can't give us purpose and meaning. They can add meaning to our lives and be someone who is incredibly valuable in our lives, but they cannot give us purpose and meaning. And if we expect a sort of purpose and meaning from that person, that they will give us that sense or give us this sense of fulfillment, we're probably placing a burden on them under which a relationship can or often will just buckle. But what we can do, and this is what I hear you guys describing, is that we can give of our whole selves on behalf of another person so that they can flourish. And that the gospel of Jesus in this picture of Jesus' love actually empowers us to do that, shows us how to do that. We had a conversation on the podcast last week, Hunter and I, preceding this one, about singleness, sort of within this same context of relationships, how the world teaches us to view them, what the Bible says about them. And so if someone is single and listening to this conversation today, it can feel really out of reach for them, or it could create all sorts of just different emotional responses in someone who is in a season of singleness. So if someone is single and listening to this today, how does this conversation impact them?
Well, I think ultimately, Adam and I are married to one another, but ultimately this whole idea speaks to relationship in general, right? So the idea of being a person who cares for the well-being and the sanctification of the people around you, and not just treats relationships as from the perspective of what they can do for you or how they can best serve you. So I think ultimately it's really about love and service of other people, sacrificing of yourself for other people. And even within marriage, right? There's a healthy way for that to happen, and there's an unhealthy way for that to happen. When it's healthy when it looks like the picture of, like you were saying, of Christ and the church, where it's happening on both sides. And even the way that Paul talks about it in Ephesians, there's an unhealthy way where someone is sacrificing constantly and the other person is not. And they are, kind of lording over the other person. And that is not what the Bible calls us to. The Bible calls us to be people who love one another and serve one another. But the idea is that it is reciprocal, that it's happening on both sides. And so that's where I think a healthy marriage and a healthy relationship with friends or with people around you is happening on equal footing in that way.
I think too, just to see and understand that part of God's call on our life is marriage, and yet it doesn't make what God wants to do with our marriage or with our lives any more significant than what God wants to do in every person who's a part of who's a child and who's his child. And so I think there are some really distinct things about marriage, and there are some really kind of neat and beautiful aspects of the gospel that you get to experience in marriage. And yet the significance on the call of my life and on Erin's life and our life together, it's different, but in terms of its real significance and value, it's the same as my single friends and others in my community whose lives may not look totally like ours in marriage. And so I think there's a real, I think it's easy to, especially within the context of the church, Christian kind of community, to have this emphasis put on marriage, this kind of pedestal, and we sort of see and hear that all the time. But just to kind of pull back and evaluate kind of there's real dignity in every person that God has called to follow Jesus, and there's something significant God is calling us to do in all of our lives, and part of our story is marriage. But anyways, that's it's not like, I don't know, the ultimate. It's not like the final stage. I don't know.
Yeah. That within a person's life, Erin, as you were saying, the way you were present in the lives of others can point through your words and actions to something greater.
Yeah.
In the same way, you can you can do that as a married person,
Right.
or
Right.
as a single person.
Right. Right.
That the way you approach relationship, your
Yeah.
understanding of the purpose of relationship,
Yeah.
can point the people around you to a greater reality and to a sort of love that isn't just generated within yourself.
Yeah, it's not self-serving. It's pointing to a love that is ultimately for the good of the other person. And I think that's what, a lot of what we've been talking about here today within marriage, but that applies to all relationships, I think.
And your marriage itself, just like the individual approach to relationships can point to a greater reality and a greater sort of love, your marriage itself points to something greater than your marriage. It points to the love of Jesus. And so a question we want to ask then together is, how can you begin to use that relationship, your marriage, to demonstrate God's love not only to each other, but also to others around you? The meaning of your marriage is actually fulfilled when the love, this picture of Jesus' love, isn't hoarded to create a great life for yourself and your spouse, but it's multiplied to create a home, a place in which others can experience welcome and hospitality and a love that points them to something greater than just your good marriage or your great fun life.
Yeah, I think that that happens first, I think, with our kids, kind of bringing our kids into our marriage and allowing them to see hopefully what a healthy marriage looks like. Hopefully that's the picture we're giving.
Yeah.
But just even, allowing them to see like what it looks like for their dad to care for me and for him to do things for me and vice versa. And so I think that's sort of the first place that it happens, but you're talking about it kind of even moving outside of our own like family bubble. Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. To be honest, I don't always think about, our marriage as being something that would be beneficial to other people to walk into. And that's pretty convicting to think about and to understand it on a macro level of, there is value and worth in doing this, that life that we do together in front of other people. And we do that in front of friends, but to welcome people into our home, like you're saying, is there's a lot of value, I think, in that.
Yeah, the idea that our marriage points to this greater reality is, it's, you'd love to be like, that's always true and always real and always present, and we know that.
We always think about it like that.
I work for the church, so it's like, obviously that's all I'm thinking about.
Yes.
But there is something that is so sweet about following Jesus in that when that's not where our heads are at, and that's not where our minds are, that being reminded of kind of the purpose of our marriage and what our marriage is pointing to, like we're never that far away from it, because we're ultimately never that far away from remembering who Christ is and what he's done for us. And so it is that thing on the one hand where it's like, I don't always think about this. And at the same time, I'm never that far from it, because of, in God's kindness, he's really kept us and kept us close to the gospel. And in the gospel is the picture of marriage. So anyways, it's not always front of mind, but easy to be reminded of and come back to. And
yeah, definitely. I think that because, as you were saying, Adam, because this is the picture that's woven together. So when you are seeking to serve one another and desiring to live out a healthy marriage, even just in the context of your home, that what God does with it then is that he does multiply it and use it as a sign of this greater reality of Christ's love for us, for his church, and how within a marriage relationship, two different people who work hard to love and understand each other, that actually creates a stronger relationship, a stronger bond that's not entirely dissimilar, even though a marriage is a unique relationship, that's not entirely dissimilar from the picture that we get also of Christ and his church, in which there are a diverse set of people with different abilities, different gifts, but together, when they understand themselves in the context of Jesus' love, they are stronger. And then that provides a picture to the world of love, like you were saying, Erin.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you. Thank you for the way that you work on your relationship, that you desire to love each other and others in our community. I'm really grateful for you. And thanks for spending time talking with me today.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Thanks to Adam Anglin for our theme music and to our producer, Jesse Cowan.